Public inquiries are called royal commissions, such as the Royal Commission on the Status of Women and the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples. Public land is called Crown land. State enterprises are called Crown corporations. In the legislature, the official opposition is known as Her Majesty's Loyal Opposition. This reflects the allegiance of both sides of the House to a sovereign who plays no favorites. No matter what the party politics, the allegiance is the same. Like Canada, the United States is a federal state. Unlike Canada, it is a republic with a presidential system of government. The American president is both head of state and head of government. In other words, both a political figure with clear allegiance to a particular party and a national symbol of unity. You will find lieutenant governors south of the border. Unlike the Canadian version, the American lieutenant governor is elected, serving much the same way as a deputy premier, the governor's vice president, so to speak. In Canada, we don't elect a leader who does both jobs. In fact, we don't directly elect our prime ministers or premiers at all. Instead, the Crown calls on the leader of the party which commands the support of the House to form a government. The Governor General or Lieutenant Governor representing the Crown swears them in with their cabinets.
In the United States, the two roles are in one person, the president. And so you may not agree, in fact, feel very strongly about what a particular president is doing, but you are then, from time to time, required to stand up and support the chief of state.
But the Crown is part of Parliament, and that's important. Again, not just the formalism, but the role of the Crown, it seems to me, is to say, I'm here to protect the Constitution. I, Lieutenant Governor, I, Governor General, or I, the Queen or King, I'm here to protect the Constitution on behalf, not of myself, but of the people. And I represent the nation. I represent the general interest, the common interest, the public interest. I don't represent partisan interest.
The Crown is the unifying link for the three components of the state: the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judiciary. The Queen, of course, lives in the United Kingdom, so she needs someone to help her do her job in Canada. That's where her vice-regal representatives come in. Together, the Queen, the Governor-General, and the Lieutenant Governors carry out their respective duties, regardless of whether the Queen is personally present in Canada. It's what author Frank McKinnon calls the collective headship of state. The Governor-General represents the Queen federally, the Lieutenant Governor provincially, exercising most of her powers on her behalf. October 12, 1912. The new Saskatchewan Legislative Building is officially opened by the Governor-General of Canada, the Duke of Connaught. He is the son of the late Queen Victoria, uncle to the reigning monarch, George V. For almost 90 years after Confederation, the Governor-General is British, symbolic of Canada's former status as a colony. With the Letters Patent of 1947, the King authorizes the Governor-General to exercise almost all his powers in Canada for the purposes of the federal government.
In 1947, they wanted, again, the Canadianization of the Crown. They wanted to make it quite clear that the appointment of the Governor-General would be on the advice of the Prime Minister of Canada and not on the subject to the decision of the government in Great Britain. So this made the Crown Canadian in a way that it had formally, legally, in a way that it had never been.
1952. Vincent Massey is appointed Governor-General of Canada. He is the first Canadian to hold that office. Since then, they have all been Canadian, including Georges Vanier, the first Francophone Governor-General, and Jeanne Sauvé, the first woman appointed to the office. She was born in Saskatchewan, as was former Governor-General Ray Nittition. The Governor-General is appointed by the Queen on the recommendation of the Prime Minister and normally serves for a minimum of 5 years. Just as the Governor-General represents the Queen for the Government of Canada, the Lieutenant Governor represents the Queen for the provincial government, also serving for a term of no less than 5 years. In this way, the Queen reigns, and her governmental responsibilities are fulfilled in the provinces as well as in Canada as a whole.
Our system of government, a constitutional monarchy, is a system that works, and it works well. It is a role model for other governments and is highly respected throughout the world. It is a particular pleasure to reconvene the legislature today, one of the most hopeful times in our province in many years.
The speech from the throne, one of our best-known parliamentary traditions. With it, the Governor-General opens Parliament, and the Lieutenant Governor opens the provincial legislature. In both cases, the Queen's representative reads the speech from the throne, outlining the government's plans for the new session. The speech is written by the government, but its reading is symbolic of the role of the Crown as the formal source of the government's power. Reading the speech from the throne is just one of the responsibilities of the Queen's representative in Saskatchewan. Just as the Governor-General summons Parliament in the Queen's name and formally dissolves it, the Lieutenant Governor is responsible for bringing together the elected members of the Legislative Assembly and dissolving the legislature when the session is completed. All bills presented to Parliament and the legislature must receive royal assent from the Queen's representative before they become law.
In Her Majesty's name, I assent to these bills.
The Crown's executive powers are exercised only on the advice of the government. At the same time, executive acts, called Orders in Council, are only valid if signed by the Lieutenant Governor. The office and functions of the Prime Minister and Premier are not defined by the Constitution, but by custom and convention. This is one of the key features distinguishing our parliamentary system from other systems, such as the congressional system. In Canada, the Prime Minister and Premiers are the Queen's first ministers. The Federal Cabinet is a committee of the Queen's Privy Council for Canada. In Saskatchewan, the Cabinet is called the Executive Council. The Premier is the President of that council. One important aspect of responsible government is something called the Crown Initiative. Any vote, resolution, or bill that calls for the allotment of public money or for raising revenue through taxes must be introduced to the Assembly through a royal recommendation made by the Lieutenant Governor on the advice of the Provincial Cabinet. The executive branch of the government is responsible to the legislative branch and to the people who elected it. However, much of its formal authority comes not from Parliament or the legislature, but from the Crown. The Crown is the constitutional bridge between the executive and the legislative branches.
The role has evolved to the point where the Lieutenant Governor now acts upon the advice of the government of the day. The Lieutenant Governor is there to advise, to caution, to encourage the Premier and the government of that particular day.
It's important in our system that the Governor-General and the First Minister have a cordial but not too chummy relationship. And it seems to me that you have to keep a certain independence. You can't be an adjunct of the Prime Minister's office, for example. You have to be, remember that you represent Her Majesty, and you represent, therefore, the people of Canada. And you have a very heavy burden to make sure that you do your job properly.
They need occasionally somebody who's completely outside, who has no axe to grind, and in fact, you sort of say, well, if we look back this experience, that experience, perhaps we should be careful on this one or that one.
The Queen, the Governor-General, and the Lieutenant Governor are custodians of the Constitution. Their responsibility is to see that the rules are followed, both written and unwritten.
Like the Governor-General, the main responsibility of the Lieutenant Governor is to make sure there is always a First Minister or Premier. In Saskatchewan, as in all of Canada, the Assembly must be dissolved within 5 years of the last election, and another election must be called. The Lieutenant Governor calls upon the party leader, who commands a majority in the Legislative Assembly, to form a government and become Premier. If no party has a clear majority, The Lieutenant Governor calls upon an elected member of the Assembly who would be able to get that majority. If there is a minority government and it is defeated in the Assembly, the Lieutenant Governor may dissolve the Legislative Assembly and call for a new election, or call on someone else in the Assembly to form a government. 1929. When the Liberals under Premier James Gardiner fail to win a majority in the election and are defeated by a vote of non-confidence in the Saskatchewan Legislative Assembly, Lieutenant Governor Henry Newlands invites Conservative opposition leader James Anderson to form a new government. The Governor-General and Lieutenant Governors also have the power to dismiss the First Minister or entire governments. This would happen only under extraordinary circumstances. The Governor-General has never dismissed a Canadian government, and the last time a Lieutenant Governor dismissed a provincial government was in 1903. The Lieutenant Governor, like the Governor-General, also has the power to refuse royal assent, or to reserve it for the Governor-General's consideration. Once again, these powers are rarely used, though Lieutenant Governors did refuse assent on a few occasions decades ago. 1961. Saskatchewan Lieutenant Governor Frank Bastido reserves royal assent on a mineral rights bill he feels is unconstitutional. He refers it to Governor-General Georges Vanier for consideration. On advice of the federal cabinet, royal assent is granted and the bill becomes law. It is the last time this power is used by any lieutenant governor anywhere in Canada. Visits from members of the royal family have been an important part of Canada's history. Bringing the monarchy into direct contact with Canadians from many walks of life. Reminding us of Canada's heritage and political structure. (1919). Saskatchewan welcomes the Prince of Wales, one day to become Edward VIII. A soldier just back from the Great War,